The latest NFL news and notes around the Eagles and the league with John McMullen from 97.3, ESPN.com, and, of course, covers the league nationally, FanRag Sports NFL, on Twitter at JF McMullen. So Brandon Graham taking to Twitter today basically put out a full statement, John, that he does not holding out. He doesn't know where this comes from.
That's what
right.
they call it, a mea culpa.
He was pretty insistent that this reports were fake news.
Fake news comes to Philly. Well, you know, I've tried. I was talking to Josh off air. I tried to bend over backwards to explain, by definition, he can't be holding out because he doesn't have to be there. So I don't think anybody reported he was holding out, at least anybody who understands the rules of the NFL. The question was, he left, and was he planning to hold out from mandatory minicamp? And I said on this show, I think Brandon's too much of a professional. I think he will be here for minicamp. Don't know if he'd be here for OTAs, and he is showing up for voluntary OTAs. But, again, by definition, he could not be holding out. So I understand his anger with that word, but I don't think it really changes anything. And the fact that he might want to talk to his agent, who is probably the one, not probably, who is definitely the one saying, hey, look, this is backward. Brandon Graham can't make less than his backup. And by the way, he's not wrong, Joel Siegel, his agent. So I don't think much has changed except Brandon's back from Detroit.
Right. Now, he had sent out kind of a picture of a whole statement, and he tweeted that out. And he basically said, look, I was spending some time with my family, don't know where this all came from. But as you kind of chronicled last week, it would be somewhat justifiable of a reason that he is making less money than Vinny Curry. But so the feeling from you is that Brandon Graham is telling the truth, that he will be a good soldier, he's going to show up, and that he has no issues. In fact, the team has kind of suggested that his agent has never called.
Well, actually, and that's where it becomes a little murky. Howie said he never had a issue with Brandon Graham. Brandon Graham has never had an issue with his contract. Then when pressed and said, has his agent contacted you, then Howie sort of went into the parse language. And as I pointed out last week on the show, that's how these things are handled. Brandon's not going to knock on Howie Roseman's door. His agent's going to do it. And I think it's very similar to what happened last season with Darren Sproles. Technically, Darren Sproles didn't hold out of anything, but he wasn't here, and the spin was he was a veteran player who wanted to spend time with his family, and lo and behold, late July comes around, and he got a one-year extension. And I've said it from the start of this, and I still believe it. At some point later this summer, it's going to be a blurb. Something's going to happen with Brandon Graham's contract. Either he gets more money up front, either he gets a year tacked on. Something is going to happen.
So he tweeted today that his absence from the team had nothing to do with his contract. He's not unhappy with this deal. Let me read for you exactly what he tweeted out. Back in Philly, and I just wanted to be clear, to clear a few things up for all of our fans. I was never holding out. I was in Detroit last week spending some time with my family. I love playing in Philly. I love our fans. I love this organization. I've never had an issue with my contract. I don't know where that news came from. I will be here at OTAs leading the charge and ready to get things started. So this sounds like a guy who wants to be a career Eagle, right?
Yeah, and I believe that. And I've never wavered. I said Brandon was a tremendous professional, and I doubt he would ever hold out. And he's set to make significant money this season. But the problem is, again, it's backward. Your backup can't make more than you. That's just the way the NFL works. And even if Brandon is completely happy, trust me, Joel Siegel sees that and sees an opportunity to knock on Howie Roseman's door.
So let me ask you this, John. So, John, let me ask you this real quick. I know where you're going, but let me ask you this. So does Joel Siegel get to, who was it, the Inquirer, and kind of say let's make it look like we're holding out. We're really not holding out, just to bring to light that we'd like a new contract.
Well, I can't speak for Jeff McMullen, but I can tell you that that's usually how these things work. It's usually the agent who contacts the reporter and will give information. So it's very likely that's a possibility of what happened. And hey, that's Joel's job. I mean, his job is to look out for Brandon Graham. And as I said, he's not. By the way, he's not doing his job if he just sits back and says, you know what, no problem. Brandon loves it here, which he does, loves playing for the Eagles, which he does, and says, I'm not going to create any waves. It's his job to take advantage of a situation. And the situation is the presumed backup to Brandon Graham at this point makes more money. So it's an easy phone call. It starts with, hey, look, Howie, Brandon's happy, but this ain't right. Something's got to change. It might be a $500,000 bump to get him ahead, but something's got to happen.
So
and that's my estimation of what happened.
So do the Eagles have the ability to do it? I mean, we know they're pretty cash-strapped here. Do they have the ability to say, Brandon, we get it. You're below. You're paid less than Curry. We can't do a lot, but this is what we'll do.
Yeah, they have the ability to do it. I mean, that's the strength of Howie Roseman's game as a general manager, is a salary cap guy. And, that's probably what happened here is sort of a wink-wink, as I wrote on 973ESPN.com. It's like, Brandon, you're a leader of this team. We need you here. We're going to take care of you. And I think there's trust on both sides. And I think ultimately that's what happens, and they will. Similar to Darren Sproles, they will make a slight adjustment. It won't be a huge 3-4 year extension with a massive raise. It'll just be a slight adjustment that's a blip on the radar later this summer, and everyone will have forgotten this dust-up, but this dust-up will be where it started.
John McMullen with us, and yeah, John, the Eagles with that less than $2 million available under the salary cap currently, but then that also brings into mind a guy like Vinny Curry. What's Vinny Curry's role? Can the Eagles find a way to restructure him?
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility, and there are a number of players here, Vinny Curry, Michael Kendricks, Jason Kelsey, who are up, Ron Brooks, who are up for being restructured. In fact, they already did restructure Ron Brooks, but they could be released. They could be traded. So there's a number of dominoes left to fall. We're in mid-May. We have a 90-man off-season roster. Eventually, it's got to get down to 53. So there's a lot of dominoes to fall here yet.
Yeah, Curry's. They signed him last year, so they obviously at one point, and this is, I guess that's a Howie signing, right? I mean, Howie made that deal. They believed that Vinny Curry was, you want to say, better than Brandon Graham?
Yeah, I mean, if you rewind to this exact date last year, the plan for the Philadelphia Eagles was that Vinny Curry was going to be the starting left defensive end, and Connor Barwin was going to be the starter on the weak side, and Brandon Graham was going to be the third man in the rotation to mix in and play on both sides. That was the plan. They thought Vinny Curry had a chance to be a really top-tier edge rusher in this league. He was underutilized in Howie Roseman's mind. Didn't work out that way. Didn't play well. Signed the big deal. Brandon took over, played at a second-team All-Pro level. He's the one who took off, not Vinny. And now we fast forward, and we're in the situation we're in where the guy who's the second-team All-Pro is making less than the guy who had a really, really poor season after signing a massive deal last year.
All right, so an interesting story today. Brandon Graham returned to the team facility. What are they in town for now? Just doing workout stuff? I mean, they just kind of lifting and stuff like that?
Yeah, just lifting and stuff like that, voluntary workouts. They can't do any on-field activity this week. That next phase starts a week from today, actually, May 23rd. So next Tuesday is when they'll be back on the field, and that's where we were all waiting to see if Brandon would show up, but he made it clear that he's already back, so that's no longer an issue.
Yep, we're talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. FanRag Sports NFL covers the league, of course, nationally, and you can follow him at JF McMullen on Twitter to get all the latest NFL news and notes. And there's a lot going on here as the teams are getting into OTAs. We talked a little yesterday about the backup quarterback situation in Seattle, where they're looking at possibly Kaepernick and RG3 out there. But I want to go back to that for a little bit. Forget all the nonsense with Kaepernick. Are there other destinations for him, or is Seattle does he even want to play football anymore? I mean, there's a lot of talk about that he doesn't even want to play football anymore, that he'd rather just be kind of an activist. Is it like Seattle or bust for him?
No, I don't think so. As you get later into the process, as I said, sometimes it's better to wait for injuries as a veteran quarterback, and then the desperation could kick in with somebody else, and other teams could start to garner some interest. As far as whether he wants to play or not, yeah, I mean, nobody knows because, look, he's got, and I'm not going to call anybody out by name, but he's got a lot of people doing lip service for him and trying to paint this narrative that he's being banned from the NFL. And to me, it's silly for this reason. It's assuming that every decision maker in the NFL is exactly the same, and they're all this Donald Trump supporting, do not like social activism. And anybody who's ever met Jeffrey Lurie, for instance, right in this town, he's a left-leaning guy. Jed York in San Francisco, where he was, is as progressive as it gets. So on that face, and Seattle, Pete Carroll and John Snyder, also very liberal people. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the assumption that everybody's the same and getting together and banning Colin Kaepernick, it's silly. And it doesn't hold water if you look under the surface. In fact, it's very least common denominator thinking. It's childish thinking that doesn't take into account obvious differences that people have. Just like Jeffrey Lurie, as I mentioned, is a lot different from a political standpoint than Robert Kraft. Assuming all rich people are the exact same, it's just dumb.
Speaking of guys who are anti-Trump, John, here's an interesting story. Mark Cuban thinks that the NFL chasing money in Las Vegas will ultimately backfire. Do you agree with Mr. Cuban?
No, I don't think it'll backfire. I mean, it depends what you mean by backfire. Will it show the hypocrisy of the NFL? Sure. But, I mean, is that backfiring? They're still getting the money, and they will embrace the money. So I guess it depends how you want to define it. But this is a league that it's so popular, it's really, really difficult to make mistakes. And the Raiders are going to be popular in Las Vegas, and the NFL and the organization themselves are going to profit from that, obviously. So from that standpoint, I don't think it's going to backfire on them at all.
Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. Spent a few minutes talking about the NFL with John McMullen, as we do every day at this time. Big Ben's teammate, John, Willie Colon, says Roethlisberger seriously considered retiring. How many more years of Big Ben? Now, we saw him at the hockey game the other night. That was rare, too, to see him at the Penguins game. But how many more years of Big Ben do the Yinzers, the Pittsburghers get?
Well, will he be the first of that 04 class to go?
Yeah, I mean, he's still playing at a very high level, so that's obviously a personal decision. He can still play. Obviously, Pittsburgh went very far last season. They project to go very far this season. It's one of the best teams in football, one of the best offenses in football. But his style of play is really, really difficult on the body. I mean, he's able to he's such a strong guy. We think about Ben Roethlisberger in the pocket and rushers just kind of melting off of him because he's so strong and so powerful. But, hey, you take a beating when you play that way. And this sport is a grind. And we've seen it every year there's a few players that say, you know what, it's not worth it any longer, and I don't want to go through what it takes to play. Ben, to retire this season would have had to give the Steelers back $18 million. So I never thought it was serious. It's really difficult to write that check and hand that money back over to the Steelers. So I didn't think that was going to happen. But, hey, if he has another season where he gets banged up and takes a lot of nicks and bruises, yeah, I could see him walking away, especially if the Steelers were to, say, win the Super Bowl and you have a scenario where he could possibly go out on top.
All right, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com and FanRag Sports NFL. Follow him, their national NFL columnist, at J.F. McMullen.
L.A.-esque, Manning-esque. Manning's going to host the ESPYs. Johnny, got an opinion on that?
Hey, well, if you saw Peyton host Saturday Night Live a couple years ago, he was actually really good. So I think he's better in that kind of – he's got a very dry sense of humor. I think he'll handle it well, but he's got a tough act to follow. I think Michael now, John Cena did it last year.
That's right. He was pretty good, too. All right, John, a lot of NFL stuff still going on. The OTAs open up next week for the Eagles a week from today. And, of course, we'll be all over that. Read John's piece right now at 97.3ESPN.com on Brandon Graham and his report of the contract issues being fake news.
Alternative facts.
Thanks, John.
Good stuff, John.
Hey, thanks, guys.